My name is Sherilyn Crow, and I serve as the DC chapter convener for our chapter here of the Religion Communicators Council, and also serve as Director of Communications at the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty. And it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker today. Melissa Rogers serves as Special Assistant to the President and Executive Director of the White House Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. Named to this position in 2013, she brought with her a vast array of experience at the intersection of religion and public life in church and state. She chaired the first advisory council of the office and served on a task force charged with reform of the office. She also spent time working at Wake Forest University Divinity School, the Brookings Institution, the Pew Forum on Public Life, and the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty. She's an expert in church-state law and a leader with a proven track record. There are few people I know that have more experience and more success bringing people together with a vast array of viewpoints and experiences to help them find common ground and find ways they can actually work together to accomplish something. But instead of telling you more about Melissa, let's have her come up and tell us about faith in the Obama White House and the important work she engages in every single day. Melissa?
Good morning, everyone. Great to see you. And it's great to be back with so many friends and with the Religious Communicators Council. Bill and Sherilyn and others of I we were talking just outside and realizing how long we had been coming collectively to Religious Communicators Council meetings, and it's been a long time, dating back to the 90s. So we're feeling our age perhaps a little bit, but also a great sense of joy to be able to have these relationships that continue over many years. And so it's a special pleasure to be here with you. I want to thank especially Sherilyn Crow, my good friend and former colleague at the Baptist Joint Committee, for that very kind introduction, and my friend Bill Aiken and for his long friendship and service, and Janine Merkel for organizing this event, which looks terrific. And frankly, I wish I had been able to be with you yesterday and for the rest of your program today, which looks just very intriguing. I also want to thank the Executive Director of the Religious Communicators Council, Shirley. She has been here for many years, and we're grateful for her service and for how she ably leads this group. Well, I'm so glad to be with you this morning for a great conversation about faith and the Obama White House. You know, many discussions of faith and various presidents and White Houses focus on the personal faith of presidents and their outreach to religious communities. And those are important topics, but they're not my topics this morning. Instead, I will focus on three other relevant issues. First, the principles that President Obama has articulated for the interaction between religion and government. Second, the Obama administration's approach to partnerships with faith-based and community organizations. And third, the way in which the administration handles policymaking as it relates to religion. So first, the principles. As you know, our First Amendment requires the government to ensure that it makes no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Now, President Obama has spoken about these values repeatedly, and I'll just highlight a few of his statements this morning. He has said, for example, that we believe in the inherent dignity of every human being, dignity that no earthly power can take away. And central to that dignity is freedom of religion, the right of every person to practice their faith how they choose, to change their faith if they choose, or to practice no faith at all, and to do this free from persecution and fear. Now, of course, there's some disagreements today on exactly how these principles apply in particular circumstances, but there's widespread agreement that the principles articulated by the Free Exercise Clause are so central to the American experience, and of course, an important bedrock of religious liberty protections in America. The First Amendment's Establishment Clause is also something that the President has addressed. Now, you know in this room that sometimes the Establishment Clause is portrayed in our public discussion as a source of protection for those who are not religious. And of course, the Establishment Clause does provide protection for and safeguards that make sure that non-religious groups and individuals are safeguarded in their rights as well, and that's quite appropriate. But as President Obama has long recognized, the Establishment Clause is also essential for faiths to thrive. In fact, I remember listening to then Senator Barack Obama at a Sojourners Conference in 2006 when he said, "The separation of church and state has played a critical role in preserving not only our democracy, but the robustness of our religious practice." President Obama continued, then Senator, saying, "Folks tend to forget that during our founding, it wasn't the atheists or the civil libertarians who were the most effective champions of the First Amendment. It was the persecuted minorities. It was the Baptists, like John Leland, who didn't want established churches to impose their views on folks. It was the forebears of the evangelicals who were the most adamant because they did not want state-sponsored religion hindering their ability to practice their faith as they understood it." The president returned to this theme at this year's National Prayer Breakfast, as some of you may know. Now, you may recall, if you were there or watching it on TV, that at this year's prayer breakfast, the president spoke after NASCAR legend Darrell Waltrip offered very personal reflections on his faith journey. And you may also remember that the Dalai Lama was at the event as well. And that prompted the president to remark that there aren't many occasions that bring together His Holiness the Dalai Lama under the same roof as NASCAR. But I digress. At the National Prayer Breakfast, the president said the following words about the separation of church and state. He said, "We need to uphold the distinction between our faith and our governments. The United States is one of the most religious countries in the world, far more religious than most Western developed countries. And one of the reasons is that our founders wisely embraced the separation of church and state. Our government does not sponsor a religion, nor does it pressure anyone to practice a particular faith or any faith at all. And the result is a culture where people of all backgrounds and beliefs can freely and proudly worship without fear or coercion. So when you listen to Darrell Waltrip talk about his faith journey, you know it's real. You know he's not saying it because someone told him to do it or that it helps him advance. It's from the heart. And that's not the case, the president said, in theocracies that restrict people's choice of faith. It's not the case in authoritarian governments that elevate an individual leader or political party above the people, or in some cases above the concept of God himself. So the freedom of a religion is a value we will continue to protect here at home and stand up for around the world. State-sanctioned religion, the president recognized, not only hampers the faith that is not favored, it also undermines the faith that the government embraces. Indeed, the fact that faiths are not government endorsed ensures their independence and their integrity, and thus their ability to be powerful voices on not only private issues, but public issues as well. So put together, the First Amendment's establishment and free exercise clauses ensure that people of all faiths and none stand as equal citizens before their government, and it ensures that religion is an independent and authentic force in American society. And we're really fortunate to have such a system of liberty in our country, and we have it only because we strive to keep it every day, and because government officials and many others, including many American citizens, have been so careful and so vigilant to ensure that our religious liberty is protected for generations to come. So my first point is that President Obama embraces both the letter and the spirit of these constitutional commands and has set them forward for us in government to abide by and respect. Well, the second area that I wanted to touch on is partnerships. As you all know, I direct the Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships at the White House. Now, this doesn't come up much these days, but there used to be a fairly robust debate about whether the creation and the operation of the office that I direct actually violates the First Amendment. So it's probably helpful for me to address that as I turn the corner to the topic of partnerships. Let me be clear. The mission of the Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships is not to promote faith. That is the job of religious individuals and institutions themselves, of course. The mission of the Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships is to serve people in need by forming partnerships with faith-based and other community groups. In other words, our aim is to serve people who are struggling. That's our mission. The means by which we achieve that mission is to form partnerships with non-governmental organizations. This mission is consistent with, not contradictory to, the Constitution. As President Obama said in 2008, the goal of this office will not be to favor one religious group over another, or even religious groups over secular groups. It will simply be to work on behalf of those organizations that want to work on behalf of our communities, and to do so without blurring the line that our founders wisely drew between church and state. This work is important, the president said, because whether it's a secular group advising families facing foreclosure or faith-based groups providing job training to those who need work, few are closer to what's happening on our streets and our neighborhoods than these organizations. So President Obama sees matter of faith not only through a theological lens as a person of faith himself, and not only through a legal and constitutional lens as a lawyer and former constitutional law professor, but also through a very practical lens as a former community organizer who worked with faith and community groups for many years in Chicago. The president knows that faith communities, as well as other communities, often play a key role in helping people get a better shot at life. Now, during the previous administration, a particular focus for the office was on government funding and how more religious groups or more types of faith-based groups could compete for those funds. And at times, the measure for success was, are faith groups getting more government money? That's not the measurement that we use. Now, let me be clear, religious groups are of course welcome to compete for government grants as they have long been able to do. And at the same time, I want to note that our office does not have any authority to give out government grants. Indeed, we play no role in awarding grants in particular cases, and properly so. But we do inform people about how to apply for government funds if they're interested in doing so, both faith and non-faith related groups. And the agencies handle that and make decisions in the appropriate way about awards. Our focus, however, has been on forming non-financial partnerships with faith-based and community groups, ones in which no money passes hands. After all, many organizations, including many religious bodies, don't want to get money from the government. But they do want to work with the government to try to help people in need. Now you might ask, why should the government partner with faith and community groups to serve people in need? Is it just a nice form of outreach? My answer is an emphatic no. It's actually a crucial way to reach people who are struggling. The government has an array of benefits and services that are critical to many Americans. But in many cases, the people who actually need those benefits and services don't know about them and may not be able to access them. So here's one of the key places where faith and community groups come into the picture. Faith and community groups are often the crucial link between government benefits and services and the people who need them. After all, most Americans aren't frequenting the websites of federal agencies, especially given how busy people are these days. But most people do have ties to at least one faith-based or community group. And they especially turn to those groups when they're struggling, when they're in crisis. Thus, they're much more likely to hear about a new flu shot, veterans benefits, job training programs, or college aid applications, through a church or a community group. And because these groups make it their work to help people have a better shot at life, they stay engaged with people. In other words, they don't just tell a promising young student without the money to go to college about the federal application for student aid, or the FAFSA form as we call it. They invite the student down into the church basement, and they sit with the student and gather the information that's necessary for the form, and they help the student fill it out, and they are encouraging to the student, and then they make sure that application gets submitted. Now that right there can make the difference for a person between a life of struggle and one of success. So that's just one example of the difference that faith and community groups make. President Obama's emphasis on these non-financial partnerships, if you will, has opened doors for us to work with a wide variety of organizations and leaders, and I believe to do a lot of good. And I just want to note, we also have with us this morning Ken Bedell from the Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships at the Department of Education. And he does this work very ably with his colleagues, including the Reverend Dr. Brenda Girton Mitchell. And so we are grateful for his work and join in thanking him for that daily activity that he does in the education space to help people in need. I also want to note that the Obama administration will soon take a large step closer to making a set of common ground reforms that will strengthen the partnerships the federal government forms with faith-based and community organizations to serve people in need. A number of federal agencies will issue proposed rules that will clarify some of the rules that apply to the partnerships and extend added religious liberty protections for social service beneficiaries. And I can speak to that in more length later if you're interested in discussing it. Let me just say for now that the impetus for these reforms came from a very diverse advisory council for faith-based and neighborhood partnerships, the first such advisory council. And in a previous life, I actually chaired that council. So it's interesting for me now to sit in government and be helping agencies implement recommendations that I helped to make while serving as an advisory council member. In 2009, President Obama asked this council to make recommendations for strengthening the social service partnerships the government forms with non-governmental providers, including strengthening the constitutional and legal footing of these partnerships. Now, this council, I don't know how many of you remember it, but it was quite diverse, religiously, ideologically, politically. We did not agree on every matter, it's safe to say, in this area. In fact, we were just very heartened to find that we did agree about some things, and that was a cause for celebration. We came to agreement on a number of significant recommendations for reforms for these partnerships between faith-based and community groups and the government. And so in response to our recommendations, President Obama signed Executive Order 13559. And we've been going through a process since then to get to a space where the agencies would be ready to issue proposed rules about these matters. So stay tuned for that. The agencies will issue these proposed rules, and we'll be very glad to see that happen. Now, I should make it clear that the agency rules won't be the only way in which the agencies will implement these advisory council recommendations and the executive order. They will also make changes through guidance, practices, and communication strategies in response to the advisory council recommendations. Those do not require regulatory changes, so there will be both regulatory and non-regulatory changes to be responsive to the president's executive order. At the time the first advisory council made its recommendations to the president, its members said, "As far as we know, this is the first time a governmental entity has convened individuals with serious differences on church-state issues and asked them to find common ground in this area. It shouldn't be the last time the government asks such a group to do so. Policies that enjoy broad support are more durable, and finding common ground on church-state issues frees up more time and energy to focus on the needs of people who are struggling. If adopted, these recommendations would improve social service delivery and strengthen religious liberty. They would also reduce litigation, enhance public understanding of these partnerships, and otherwise advance the common good. So we look forward to joining the agencies in celebrating these important advances. My third and final topic, policy. Another distinguishing feature of President Obama's approach to religion and government is that he recognizes that policymaking must be mindful of religion, mindful in ways that respect constitutional commands, of course. Of course, as you know, it's one of the core responsibilities of the department and agency general counsels, the Department of Justice, the White House counsel's office, to ensure that the administration's actions are always consistent with law, including the First Amendment. But, as you also know, sometimes actions under consideration are neither prohibited nor required by law, and that leaves room for policy choices. So let me explain that a little further. In other words, sometimes the government is not required to accommodate the concerns of certain religious entities, but it's also not prohibited from doing so. It has a choice. Sometimes the government is not prohibited from funding certain activities that are offered by a religious entity, but it is also not required to fund those particular activities. So the government has a policy choice to make. So the question in this space is, what should the government do? The Supreme Court has actually recognized this space for policy choices by saying, and I'm quoting here, "There is room for play in the joints, productive of a benevolent neutrality, which will permit religious exercise to exist without sponsorship and without interference." So there are policy choices to be made here, and they are as significant as any other policy choice, like ones made about education, health, and housing. So it's our job to identify cases like these where policy choices can be made, and to analyze and sometimes propose policy options for consideration. And here we seek to consult, when we consult outside stakeholders, which is very frequently, we do so with religious leaders and institutions, and we also do with non-religious leaders and institutions because they too have a stake in policy choices that implicate religion. This work keeps us very busy. As everyone in this room knows, religion runs through every human endeavor. So it has the potential to be affected by almost any law or public policy. For example, in my short time in government, I have not only dealt with policy making in the White House, but in this space, but also policies made by VA, HUD, DOJ, USAID, state, HHS, USDA, DOL, the Department of Education, SBA, Commerce, and the list goes on. It keeps us busy. Now, most of the time, the policy-making process within the federal government, including at the array of federal agencies, is not focused on the impact of different policy choices on religion. Instead, the focus is simply on trying to formulate sound policies about health, education, immigration, childcare, and development policy, for example. Nonetheless, policies that are developed to promote those goals sometimes impact religious individuals and institutions in ways that merit close attention. Now, we all know that there have been examples that have burst into the news in this space that have been going on for years. For example, changes that have been made to policies about employer-based health insurance impact the kinds of insurance that religious institutions provide their employees. So that's an example that we're all familiar with. But there are also many others. Just to name a few, changes to our educational policies may affect religiously affiliated schools. Changes to food and nutrition policy may affect religious beliefs and practices. For example, beliefs and practices related to kosher or halal food. Immigration policy can affect the flow of ministers to and from the United States. After all, many, if not most congregations consider themselves to be worldwide institutions, not necessarily American institutions. So the president believes that we must be mindful about the ways in which policy and law implicate and influence religion. We need to try to anticipate conflicts and concerns and do our best to understand them and address them appropriately. Now, this type of review and analysis doesn't dictate results. It does not guarantee that there will not be pushback on various administration policy decisions. But it should mean that we've done some due diligence in this area and that we've really tried as best we can to give thoughtful consideration to various policy alternatives. Our commitment to a delicate balance between religion and government demands no less from us. Today, especially, as you know so well, there are debates in this area that are fraught, and that makes our job difficult. But I think it also points to its importance. Let me conclude, however, by turning the focus back to you. It's your job to help people better understand these difficult issues, to understand the choices that are made by government and how those will affect people and how people feel about those various issues. You help people better understand the role of religion in public life, which is an extremely important task today and a challenging one. So I want to end by thanking you for covering these issues and prioritizing them as the Religious Communicators Council has done for so long, and for doing so with accuracy, nuance, and insight, which is critical to a better understanding of faith in American public life. So thank you for doing that very important job, and thank you very much for inviting me to be here with you today. So with that, I will open up for some questions and comments. I wanted to say before I did that I mentioned Ken is with us with the Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. We also have, I think many of you know, Centers for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships or entities like that in a great array of federal agencies. And those leaders in those agencies play an extremely important role in forming the partnerships that I described. And it's a very talented team. And I'd just like to thank all of them as well. I believe tomorrow you'll hear from Sean Casey, who's at the State Department and has opened there with under Secretary Kerry's leadership, an important office that deals with religion and global affairs. And we're very glad to have him on the team as well. So I just wanted to give recognition to all the folks in the agencies who've been doing this work for a very long time. And we're very grateful that we can work with them because we do work very closely with them. In fact, we talk to each other on the phone daily to report activities that we're engaged in and to help one another and to think about how we can work better across government to serve people in need, because people don't exist in silos where they've got education, and health separated from job opportunities. People are people, and they experience problems often linked with other problems in their lives and struggles. So what we as a team try to do is get our various representatives from the Department of Labor, the Department of Health and Human Services, the Department of Education to come together and look at cross-cutting partnerships that we can form that will take a whole of government approach to addressing the real struggles in people's lives. And that's a special strength and ability of our office, and one for which we're very grateful. So having said that, let me turn and welcome questions or comments that you might have about our work or any of the topics that I mentioned.
Would you address two specific examples of partnerships that you've facilitated in your office, and actually name names of the players and not just talk in generalities?
Sure. We have, let me think, one of the partnerships that we're working on right now is the Summer Food Service Program. Many of you know that during the school year, children who need meals that cannot pay for them get free nutritious meals from their schools. And the problem in the summer is that many of these many of these children they're not in school, and so they're not getting that free nutritious meal from the federal government, subsidized by the federal government. So we need to come up with many more places that can offer those free subsidized meals to children during the summer, like where they're coming for summer camp or summer activities. And so we work with an array of partners, and I'll just name a few of them, and I won't be able to name all of them, but like the Salvation Army, Share Our Strength, the Texas Hunger Institute, to work with, and they each work with Catholic Charities, and actually Archdiocese of the Archdiocese in Philadelphia. I was not too long ago with them, and they had a partnership with the Salvation Army to offer, at the Salvation Army there were activities going on for the children, and also the delivery of this federally subsidized meal for children so that they could thrive in the summer as well as during the school year. So those are just a few examples of some one partnership that we're working on and some particular partners. Another partnership that I'll mention is one that we're working on to try to end veterans' homelessness. So we work with an array of shelters that are faith-based and non-faith-based on ensuring that veterans who are coming into the shelters are identified and then linked with all the array of federal benefits that are due to veterans to help them get in a situation where they are no longer homeless and hopefully have a job and can rebuild their lives. So with that, we have worked, and I'll just scratch the surface, but groups like Catholic Charities, we have worked with the Gospel Rescue Missions, and with Jewish federations, and also Lutheran Services in America. So those are just a few of the partners with whom we work, as well as United Way. We've worked actually with United Way, we've worked with them and on trafficking issues, which I can talk about at greater length if you're interested, which is another big focus of our office to ensure that we're doing everything that we can to end human trafficking, both in the United States and around the world. Now, let me mention one other thing, that we work with global development groups as well through our partners and center at USAID. And we have so many partners through that work, and also have worked specifically over the past year on Ebola issues, and have worked in that context with Mercy Corps, Médecins Sans Frontières, Catholic Relief Services, and many others, Lutheran Services, United Methodist, UMCOR, United Methodist, I'm not going to get that exactly right, committee. So those are just some of the partners and some of the issues that we worked with. And we have both a domestic and an international focus. But I could sit here for the rest of the day and recite in all the various federal agencies the partnerships that are ongoing, because there are quite a wealth of them. Mm-hmm.
Melissa, I'd
Yes.
like to add one. Yesterday, we talked about the problem of illiteracy among Americans, and religious illiteracy. And a program that I get to work with is the President's Interfaith and Community Service Campus Challenge, which has partners. A major partner is the Interfaith Youth Corps, but we also partner with almost 500 institutions of higher education to facilitate and encourage programs in interfaith community service, which is a co-curricular activity to address some of what we were talking about in terms yesterday of higher education, illiteracy of college students, and helping to broaden the understanding about people's own faith and other faiths as well.
Yeah, great example. And I'll put in a little plug. We're celebrating the 5th anniversary of the Interfaith and Community Service Campus Challenge this September. We're really looking forward to that. That has grown by leaps and bounds because of the good leadership that we've had at the Department of Education, and frankly, just the interest that young people have in matters of faith, whether they themselves are religious or they're just interested in the issues. And we've had them flock to that program. And some of the partners there include, the Ibu Patel with the Interfaith Youth Corps, and many others that have some link to faith. But interestingly, we have also had a great partner in the Secular Coalition that has worked with us and has said, look, we are not a religious group, but we have interest in areas of faith, and we want people to understand what people who are not religious, how they approach these issues. And there's a need to ensure that people treat one another with respect across these lines. So they have been a very active partner, along with many religious partners in this Interfaith and Community Service Campus Challenge. And that has given us a great opportunity to speak to misunderstandings and differences, and hopefully to calm tensions across religious lines in our own country, while providing some real important services to people in need in our communities. Yeah, please.
You described how you fit in this little gap between the required and the not required. Sometimes Congress, though, inadvertently crosses that line that would challenge the religious values, or in their rules, they may make rules that step on the religious freedom. How do you handle that in your office?
Well, Congress, of course, is another branch of government, an independent branch of government, and we have respect for them, of course, in that sphere. They have their sphere of influence. The executive branch is the second branch, and the judicial the third, obviously. So, we respect them as an independent branch of government, and let them work their will in their body, and then the president has his ability to interact with them as well. Of course, informally, we are often in conversation with people on the Hill. They will invite us to come down to speak with them about particular issues, and we always appreciate those offers. We get them from offices of Republicans and Democrats, and whenever I get those invitations, I try to accept them and create the dialogue, because I think it's always better when people are talking more across government. But we would certainly respect the prerogatives of Congress to work its will in its particular sphere of influence. And so that's kind of how that works. Yes?
I appreciate your role as a spokesperson and a representative of the administration, but I'm interested as well in more personal insight. And so a two-part question. What is one of your greatest joys of your role, and what is one of the most challenging parts of your role?
Thanks. One of the greatest joys, I would say, is this is my first time in public service. I never worked in the government, much less the White House, until I took my job at the White House. And I have always had a great respect for public servants, but I'm not sure I ever understood what that meant until I got to the job. And so part of the joy is in being able to serve one's country. I've always been a person of faith and working for religious organizations, and I've always taken a great joy in that work. At the same time, I consider myself a person who's very proud to be a citizen of the United States of America, and to be able to sit in that job and have that kind of really heavy responsibility, but also that great privilege to be able to represent our country is a remarkable thing that most, people may not ever get to experience. So I consider myself very privileged and humbled by the opportunity to serve our whole country and to serve the United States of America in this small way that I do. Another part of the joy of the job is just, and I'm sure Ken can tell you this too, and Sean tomorrow, you meet the most spectacular people that take your breath away every day. And I'm talking about, in my case, people who are serving, people who are struggling. People who are serving those homeless people who are chronically homeless and just, have real struggles. And the people who are doing that work are obviously not doing it for the recognition, which they almost never get. They're not doing it for the big bucks because that's not in the cards for them. They're not doing it because they could not be doing 10 million other things that would be enjoyable to them. They're doing it because they feel a calling, whether it's a religious calling or a non-religious calling, and they're doing it in this spectacular way that is making our country better. And so when I meet people like that, and that happens daily, I'm just so thankful and so touched and amazed by what people are doing with their gifts and talents and being good stewards of them on behalf of our country. So that's a very great joy. In terms of the challenges, there are lots of interesting challenges. I think probably one that faces many people, not just me, is the volume of the work. I described how we have, all this cross-cutting work across federal agencies, across issues. The need to serve people is enormous, especially when we're going through difficult times and some people still haven't been able to find that job that they deserve. When people are suffering from a dread disease like Ebola and we need to deal with that over in West Africa. The volume and the importance of the issues is huge. And it's hard to feel like you've done justice to everything every day, even when you're working around the clock. So that's a challenge and something that I think I'm amazed by when I see people, my colleagues in the White House who are dealing with issues, sometimes a matter of life and death, and dealing with them around the clock and being able to keep your wits about you to try to do justice to the concerns at hand, and also just to keep yourself whole for the next day so that you can come at it again. That's been something that I've never seen a volume of work like this in any other job that I've had. So that is a bit staggering and something that you have to be careful not to let yourself get overwhelmed, because then you won't be good to anybody. So you have to develop strategies for dealing with that huge volume of work and at the same time, making a real contribution and a difference. Thanks.
Melissa, thanks. I want to also pull you a little bit off the official capacity and go back in time a little bit to 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago, when you were working in Washington on
You had to
like
do that, Bill. 20
religious
years.
As a very, very young woman, you were
I was
here
12 when I started
You were
this
very
work.
young. It was
Yes.
a prodigy.
Yes, I was.
Working on issues of religious freedom and church-state relations, and of course, this is your, where your deepest background is. And I'm wondering how you view the evolving conversation about religious freedom in the United States, especially now. And for my colleagues, they might wonder why I keep bringing up RFRA. But now this new conversation about it. But maybe more generally, how you see the evolving conversation about religious freedom, what you see as being the new challenges in that area.
Thanks, Bill. And Bill got started not long after I did, so he's dating himself and not just me. And you may have even started before I did, but anyway, we won't go there. So yes, it's been a very interesting experience to have lived out the past 20 years and now going into the future working in the area of religious liberty. Religious liberty, as I described, is something that's very dear to the president, very dear to the country, and of course dear to me, and something that we always must be vigilant to protect. We have, as always has been true, religious liberty is one of our key values, and we have other key values like non-discrimination, equality, justice. How do we make sure that we strike the appropriate balance between these very key values? And while that conversation has happened for many years, and we've had it for many years, it's burst into the public sphere in perhaps an unprecedented way recently. Now, that in and of itself isn't a bad thing. It's good to have conversations about how we balance key bedrock values. But unfortunately, sometimes it's burst into the conversation in ways that perhaps may tear us more apart than bring us together. And so, I think that while we need to have this conversation. The time is now, obviously. I hope that we can do so always, and as the President said this week in his remarks at the Easter prayer breakfast, to do so with civility and respect, with generosity, with love for our neighbors, and that the conversation will truly reflect that. I think we've been successful at doing that at times, but not always. And it's incumbent on all of us to be involved in that conversation in a very active way, I think, at this moment in our nation's history.
We're going to do 2 more questions.
Okay.
Go to Brian and then to Lee.
Hi. In your remarks, you talked a little bit about a change in the emphasis of the office from the previous administration had some focus on helping religious organizations find funding to deliver services, and you talked about some ways that your office has helped religious organizations be a gateway to various federal programs. I was wondering to what extent within the Obama administration that there's a recognition of in a robust civil society, the unique contribution that religious organizations can make in delivering these services in a way that perhaps a federal bureaucracy may not be able to do.
Thanks. So I think part of our emphasis on non-financial partnerships is a recognition of the fact that there are religious and community groups that are doing outstanding work and have been long before the Bush administration office was opened and long before the Obama administration office was opened. And that, thankfully, that is true and hopefully will always be true, that there are those groups that are doing this work not because the government opened an office, but because they feel called to do this work. Again, whether it's a religious or a non-religious calling, they've done it and done it ably for years. And we do find that some of these groups, I'm not a social scientist, but we do find that these groups have incredible success many times. And what we try to do is say, yes, there is a system whereby the government makes grants and contracts sometimes with non-governmental organizations to accomplish social service ends. And then there's a whole other universe that's not government funded, that's dedicated toward the same ends. Both things have important, contributions. Both systems make important contributions, but we should never, get it out of whack where we're just focused on, one area of contribution and not the other. So we've tried to just recognize, I think what has been true for eons is that there is this other area that doesn't rest on government funding and has important results that we need to pay attention to. Now, those people may or may not want to work with us, but we want to make sure that they know that if they'd like to work with us, we'd really like to work with them.
Sorry. My question is, how do you see your office enduring after President Obama's term?
Oh, wow. Well, I haven't given that much thought. Basically, it's a good question, but I spend a lot of my time trying to get through the day and then to get through the week. So I confess I have not given thought to that. I will say that I hope that as we, get through these next year and a half or so and then beyond, I hope that we have a really good conversation about this and not one that's built on falsehoods and, charges lobbed against one another. There is a place for government to engage religion. The government, even if all it did was respect the First Amendment, government would be engaged with religion to a certain degree. Now, some people might say, well, just do that and no more. But my own view is that would be a mistake because, frankly, we have an amazing ability to work together with faith and community groups so that our work is much more than the sum of its parts. And so I would hope that we would always continue government in respectful ways and constitutional ways, in ways that are reaching out to a wide variety of faith traditions and non-faith traditions, and always be reaching out, because I do see the power of that work and the power to change lives, and the way in which when the government can share information with non-governmental groups and the non-governmental groups can tell us what they're doing and what we're not seeing, that is an incredibly dynamic and powerful process. So I hope that as we move forward that we'll continue to have a conversation about this. I hope a more nuanced conversation than we've had sometimes in the past, and that the government will continue to engage religion in a very respectful and constitutional way. So with that, I will thank you, and I want to just say that I welcome any of you who might be interested to give us a buzz and let us know about things you're doing, things that we could do that would be useful to communities you serve. And also just to thank you for this forum and this entity that I think really does a lot of good in helping people to better understand religion in American public life. Thank you.